So welcome everyone. I'm Michael Dehaan, co-founder and financial wellness leader at Quantum Leap Global. And I've got Cathy Dimarchos with us today. How are you, Cathy?
Hello, Michael. I'm very well, thank you. And thanks for having me.
No, a pleasure. And this is going to be, I think, an interview that could go anywhere. I think that's the excitement. I'm a tad nervous, but this is a women's empowerment series, and it's really, I suppose, the storytelling side around using your voice and visibility and your journey and some of the different ways that you look at things, Cathy. And I've had some interesting conversations with you already around that. And one is just so refreshing, the lens that you sort of look at life and the stories that you'll share in this interview for younger women to look at, you know, opening up their eyes and seeing what's out there maybe in a different lens. So again, thank you for being a part of this. I'm still nervous, but
Don't say that.
I'm only kidding. I'm looking forward to it. What I thought we'd do, buddy, is just for people to get to know you, is just give a sort of a brief history of you, and then we'll ask some questions from there.
Sure. Do you want me to just tell it like it is?
I'm sure you will. I want you to be authentic.
I don't think I can actually be anything else. And that's probably one thing that has become incredibly important in whatever message, that I share. Being you is honestly the best thing that you could actually gift to anybody else, because it gives them permission to actually do the same. We've created an environment, particularly through social media, where everybody looks at somebody else, particularly an influencer, and says, I want to be them. Well, you actually don't. You don't know who they are.
Yeah.
We create these stories within our own heads. So being you and actually really discovering who you choose to be is the path that we all, are going to be more enriched if we follow. And you know what? I'm still discovering who I am. It's funny. Somebody actually said to me not very long ago, and who's Cathy Dimarchos? And I had to pause, Michael, because being asked that, I don't know who I actually am yet. I'm still on a road of discovery. Yeah. The reality is that I know that I actually need to know more, and I know that I want to do more. And that's the path that I'm taking, is to always ask what else. So if I go back and tell you a little bit about me, gosh, I look back and I certainly wasn't a traditional migrant young girl. I grew up in the inner city suburb of Newtown in Sydney. And for those who might remember, some 50 odd years ago, gosh, it was a pretty, I guess, rough suburb, but I never saw it like that. We had quite a lot of Indigenous and, people did it tough in the area. And yes, it's actually changed a lot now. And yes, I still live there, so I'm pretty stable. I still live in the same street.
Well, my brother lives in Newtown. He's been there for, I think, 38 years.
Oh, right. There you go. Well, he could share some stories too.
Yes.
But I grew up, I have an older sibling who's 10 years older than me, and we are nothing alike. My mum actually worked around the clock, and my grandmother raised me because my father was incredibly ill for most of my life. I was privileged, and I recognize that now, in that my parents actually paid for a private school education. And that's pretty tough, and particularly those days. And I grew up playing rugby, cricket, with a surfboard under one hand and a skateboard under the other. So not very traditional, but I never actually looked at me being different. I did a lot of sport, I did some state running, I was a gymnast, I did all of those things. And it was actually, I guess, when I look back and even through my career, I always asked the question. I didn't hold back, and it wasn't because I was rude. I was just inquisitive. But being prepared to actually ask the question I guess, navigated me to where I am today. And I still do that. And I don't ask the questions for anything other than to better understand what I'm actually hearing, and more importantly, what's not being said.
Yeah.
So that changes the lens in which I see everything. When I'm talking with people, I read eyes. I actually watch breathing. I look at what's happening for the person in addition to what they're saying. So I get to know somebody really quickly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Spent most of my life in finance, and I still work in the industry. That's 35 years in an industry that is male dominant.
Yeah.
Did I ever feel that I was alone? If I look back and I crunch numbers, yeah, I was, 150 male to 6 female, in management positions. That's the odds aren't there for us, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Go on.
No, I was just interested in when you talked about that curiosity and ask questions, and that was something that you brought into your life again to understand. And where a lot of the women I speak with, and men for that matter, they can repress their feelings and beliefs and non-confrontational.
Yeah. Well, I hear that a lot. I mean, I actually work with C-suite and executives and, pretty high-profile people. And that is an internal dialogue that's actually been instilled from a really young age.
Yeah.
And for some reason, we've all been taught that having a difference of opinion is actually confrontation. But all that we're doing is actually just sharing our own lens of, how we perceive things or how we experience things. But because it's been instilled in that framework, of confrontation, we're actually reluctant to even share a voice, particularly when we're, amongst, I guess, colleagues that are all actually aligning. And they might actually be all aligning, not because they genuinely agree, but because they don't want to stand out and be different.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's sort of the work there, because I know you do some work around psychological safety similar to my wife, and I think that's that piece there where allowing or engaging people to speak up and not feel judged or not feel persecuted because they got great ideas.
Oh, I've worked across multiple cultures and continents, and the geniuses that I actually find in businesses who have not been asked the question, and they themselves don't put their hands up either, because they've just been told, just do it this way, this is how we do it. But you're not actually going to move forward if you're going to do it how you've done it in the past, because that's just gotten you to where you are.
Yeah.
That's the reality, right?
I couldn't agree more. Is that how, because I find people that, and a common phrase I hear is that I wear different masks. So as an example, I'm a mum there, and when I get to work, I've got to either take on male traits or be a different person. And then they might have something out of work. So one in particular had 3 masks, and it was fatiguing.
Look, it's hard. Michael, yeah, absolutely. What you say, it's interesting that people actually seem to think that they have to be a specific persona, in a particular role. And yet it all comes down to values. If your values are actually what your values are, that goes across everything that you do. It doesn't work in silo. When we actually run a business in silo, guess what happens? We don't have communication. So what are we doing internally? We're suppressing it, and that's burning up energy that's really not fruitful or conducive, not to you, and certainly not to the people around you.
Yeah.
So all that you're doing is actually holding back and holding back and holding back. And guess what? We've now led to a position where people are actually, seeing more mental health issues than ever before.
Yeah.
And it comes down to also expectations, right? So it's an internal dialogue of giving yourself permission to actually speak, and then the expectations of what you think everybody else wants from you and what you've been told.
Yeah. And is that the culture of the business when we're talking about that?
I think it actually becomes the culture. but I think it's also how we contribute too. And I say being courageous to actually raise that in a discussion sometimes isn't encouraged, right?
Yes.
And that's where psychological safety definitely comes into play. And also actually, it's not just the difference of opinion and having that conversation, it's also actually, celebrating failures. My gosh, let's try something different. Oh, but we'll point the finger if you fail. Well, no, we're actually going to celebrate it because you tried something different. And we know that what's been done in the past, as I said earlier, we've gotten here. But if we don't try something different, then we won't know what else we can do. But by trying and failing, we know what won't work. So let's actually take away what lessons we can from that and then actually enhance that and strengthen, right? And that's where we have a difference in, how we look at resiliency and anti-fragility. That's adding that layer into it, and actually developing people and encouraging them as we go along.
So is that conscious leadership then? Is that really, and that's the only phrase I'm going to use, that's the only one I know in a sense, but it's really listening, being in tune with what's going on. And I think you even said it before, you're reading the energy of someone there. So if you can feel them holding back, to ask questions, to really bring it out of them, to engage the team in a sense for the common good. Yeah,
look, I think conscious leadership actually takes that on board, but perhaps it's even one step further. It's even being aware. That conscious piece is recognizing that you're going to have people in the room that may not be able to respond in that moment. They need to process things. And so being conscious that they want to contribute. So we have to afford them that opportunity down the track, not expect that right now. So consciousness is, also about how we contribute to a situation, but to also actually be aware that we are all different. And whilst I may be able to quickly actually come up with a solution, and I've gone 20 years down the track, just by listening to the first 3 words, others aren't like that.
Yes.
They actually need to mull things over. They need to actually, consider all the risks, line everything up, and then come back and present something. But we often forget that too. They didn't say anything, so they've got nothing to say. Well, it's not quite like that.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's a really valid point. Yeah. So we talk about, and you, the whole of me going into work or going through life really. And I think I just want to sort of drill down on that sort of inner wisdom, inner power that women have, and then they go into the corporate world or even start their own business, and there's judgment on how they should act, and so they can lose that whole of me approach. And I might be saying it the wrong way, but what sort of guidance can you bring them always connected and being true to themselves when they're maybe making some decisions or trying to get up the corporate ladder and question values, all that sort of stuff?
The one thing that I actually bring into almost every program are values and boundaries. And I do that from a young age when I actually do leadership programs, at the age of 12, all the way through to C-suite. When you actually understand what values are important to you, and you actually understand and integrate that into your boundaries, you are so clear about the way that you're going to navigate forward. And that doesn't mean that, by setting up boundaries, that means that, it's a dead stop line. What it does is it recognizes 2 things. It either recognizes that that's actually a boundary because you've not actually crossed that over before. So you are at a position where you need to stretch and learn. Or it is, in fact, your no-go zone, but you need to define it. And when you actually do that, it makes your path forward in being the whole of you so simple, Michael. In every situation, I can tell you, and I think that's the reason why I can make really quick decisions, isn't that I'm so definitive in what's really important to me. And actually identifying my boundaries. I can then be incredibly fluid in between, because I have a really simple answer or question, I should say. Is this going to get me to where I need to be, or is it taking me further away?
Yes. Yeah.
And so therefore, we can all make decisions. Is this who I actually choose to be known for? Or isn't it me?
Yeah. Yeah. And does that boundary setting, I'm not great at it, so I'm asking the question. Does that boundary setting, does that reflect compassion for self?
Oh, absolutely. You know, if you don't actually position yourself as being part of that, I guess, collectiveness, you know, of what you want to be, it's like that. I don't like to use this, but, you know, the oxygen mask on a plane.
Yeah.
If you don't actually look at within yourself and what you want for you, you can't possibly then contribute to somebody else. You don't play a chasing game. You play an internal game. You know, I remember it was my first trip to Tanzania, and I think this is where it became incredibly clear for me. I spent some time living with a Maasai, and let me tell you, my boundaries were crossed, you know, so many times, and so were my values, but I kept coming back to what's the purpose that I'm actually here for?
Yeah.
And it's actually to serve.
Yeah.
You know, I have to leave my Western views behind, because I'm actually living, you know, amongst a culture that has been surviving and living for thousands of years. And what could I possibly know and understand about their culture other than what I'm observing through my own biased lenses, right?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
But
Wow.
understanding that, you know, it took me a long time to process. And it was only when, you know, one of the warriors shared with me, I guess, his vision, and he had set up a foundation called the Duputu Foundation. And it was actually to encourage young girls to actually look beyond what they understood within their culture, you know. So that was about being educated. It was actually about saying no to being married at the age of 11 or 13. And it was to say no, you know, to circumcision, you know. And as a Western woman, I'm thinking, oh, progress. And then I started to realize, for whom? These young girls, well, they're living in an environment, well, guess what? With peers, with their mums, with their grandmothers, in their own little community. So how does that conversation actually need to take place? It's actually intergenerational.
Yes.
It's not just about self, right? But it's actually being prepared to have that conversation and to listen, and not to judge, but just to listen and have a voice. But for me, that's not my place, because I can't possibly have a voice in that situation, because I'm going to leave. And guess what? It's dumped there.
Exactly
right.
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
Right. And so I said that to Kimani, you know, as much as I would love to actually give you my opinion, I really can't. But that took a lot for me to recognize all the triggers that were happening internally, you know, and actually recognize my own bias. And, you know, having a check-in with myself then allowed me to be my authentic self. And that included me recognizing how wrong it all sounded, that still exists, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And that's what happens in corporates. That's what happens in life. But we don't check in with ourselves to actually just go, is this me that's actually having this, you know, I guess, perception, expectation? Is it external? You know, and making a conscious choice about how I then want to continue to be forward, because we can both disagree, but we can still walk away as friends.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And I think they're the discussions that don't take place, that need to take place. And also recognizing there was another event that took place that has actually left a lot of trauma for me, because I was so conscious not to be biased and to leave my Western self behind, that as a female, we're quite intuitive.
Yes.
We know whether something feels right or it doesn't. And there was this one instance, where I actually met quite a senior person in the Maasai village. And gosh, Michael, I can't tell you what it was, but I took one look at him and he just it didn't feel right. And I shared my views, and, I was quickly actually ushered to the corner to say, no, Cathy, he's actually done a lot of really good work, for the kids in the orphanage. And, he's been around for a few years. And every time I met with him, I continuously, that intuition just kept, honing in. It was like this alarm bell. And I kept saying, Cathy, leave it behind, But as it turned out, he was actually molesting the kids.
Yeah.
And, that's something that I continuously now actually have guilt around. As to whether I could have changed anything, I don't know, Michael. That's the reality of it. But the one thing that I have recognized is, by me not actually being the whole of me all the time, I could actually miss another situation like that.
Yeah.
And so dialing into that intuition and just genuinely being who you are and sharing that, it's something we need to actually do more of, particularly as females.
And I think, and thank you for sharing that story. So, and I think what you'd share around that intuition, because even we get so busy in multiple roles potentially, and we just shut down our intuition, but that's our guidance.
Yeah.
And that tells us, the roads and whatever, and we tend to sort of block it because there's so much going on the outside. And that was a great takeaway. That's what I took away, that when you tap into that, and they said, set those healthy boundaries, and in the sense there that it's not, it can't be crossed, in the sense there that there's an awareness there. So, okay, well, what's that? And then you spoke around triggers as well. So really going, well, I'm going to breathe into that. Where's that coming from? And that to me is all around empowerment.
Yeah.
It's all around being your best self and sort of living that life of joy, abundance and vitality, which everyone deserves.
Yeah. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. I often say that, my commitment and my purpose in life is to raise the baseline of people globally, because they actually deserve that. So it doesn't matter where they're born. That shouldn't matter. But if we can contribute and actually show other people that we're prepared to actually walk our talk, then it actually gives them permission to, to dream or to hope or to actually just be themselves.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's a perfect way to, I suppose. I knew, as I said, this wasn't planned in regard to where it was going to go, and which I just, and I think if I had said to you, here's some questions, you would have gone, well, yeah. But I loved it, and I knew I would. So, and thank you for adding so much value. Again, we'll share this, and people will take the different stories and it's. I think you hit it so perfectly when we first spoke, which is, you're not telling, you're sharing. And you just shared your story, you shared yourself. And that's very powerful. So I'm very grateful for that.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure. I think that's actually really important. And, I think people actually always look to the outside and think that everybody's got it down pat. Gosh, we don't. I certainly don't. I am an eternal learner. And I certainly recognize when I actually make a mistake, but it's actually the lessons. And that's the one thing I think for everybody. Take away the lessons, from whatever it is that's happened. Don't actually get chained to the outcome.
Yes. Yeah. And don't hide the mistakes, which we find, because, we feel like we're going to be judged. If you take ownership and come up with what my lessons and what my learnings were, it's going to be received a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, what a great note to finish it off. So again, I appreciate that, and thank you for being a part of this series.
Thank you, Michael. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.